Welcome. We're going to be doing a really close exploration today, one that we've tailored specifically for you, focusing on the life, the remarkable career, and the truly heroic final hours of Thomas Andrews Jr.
That's right. He was the principal naval architect who designed the RMS Titanic.
Our mission here is to move far beyond, the fleeting images you usually see associated with this tragic story. We've pulled together a substantial stack of sources, detailed biographies, contemporary letters, and eyewitness testimony from the survivors. We want to understand not just the man who designed what was called the unsinkable ship, but the kind of man who faced the ultimate professional and personal failure aboard his own creation.
And this investigation into the sources, it reveals something quite profound. We are not just looking at a timeline of events. We're examining a story of professional excellence and immense moral character.
Yes.
The details are just so rich. They paint a complete picture of a man known equally for his genius in engineering and his fundamental humility. It's a compelling study of a person defined by dedication who, in the face of catastrophe, performed an astonishing, deeply personal act of sacrifice.
So let's start at the very beginning and sort of set the scene for the world Thomas Andrews Jr. was born into. He arrived on February 7th, 1873 in Comer, County Down, Ireland.
Which at the time, of course, was part of the United Kingdom.
Exactly. And his family was prominent, residing at Ardara House. His lineage was, it was highly distinguished.
It's so important to understand the context of his family's influence to appreciate the path he chose. His father, also Thomas Andrews, was a really powerful figure. The Right Honorable Thomas Andrews, a Privy Councillor of Ireland.
And the Privy Council was, essentially an advisory body to the sovereign.
That's it, which marks his father as a figure who was deeply entrenched in the political and judicial elite of the region.
And that high achievement didn't stop with the father, did it? His brothers also reached the absolute pinnacle of political and legal life in the next generation.
That's right. His brother, J.M. Andrews, would go on to become the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, and another brother, Sir James Andrews, would serve as the Lord Chief Justice. So when we talk about Thomas Andrews Jr., you're talking about a man born into the highest levels of political and social influence.
Which makes his career choice, not politics, not law, but heavy industry, all the more fascinating.
Absolutely.
He attended the Royal Belfast Academical Institution until he was 16 in 1889, but instead of heading off to a prestigious university, he chose the shipyard. This is where he began his life's work. A premium apprenticeship at Harland Wolff, the legendary Belfast shipyard.
And that connection to Harland Wolff, it wasn't an accident. It was facilitated by his powerful uncle, William Peary Viscount Peary, who was a part owner and later chairman of the company.
But the term premium apprenticeship here is very telling. It meant his family paid the company for the privilege of his training.
Exactly. But the sources show this wasn't some shortcut into management. It was a deep, rigorous 5-year commitment designed to immerse him in every single aspect of shipbuilding.
That's the insight we really need to pull out here. Despite his privileged background, the path chosen for him and, embraced by him was one of sweat and grime.
It was. This apprenticeship was structured to give him comprehensive foundational knowledge from the perspective of the laborer, not just the desk-bound designer.
A kind of philosophical approach to leadership, really.
I think so. The first phases of his training were entirely physical, entirely rotational. The sources detail it really well. 3 months in the joiner shop, learning how wood joined together. A month with the cabinet makers, focusing on fine interior detailing.
And then 2 months actually on the ships.
Right, on the ships themselves. Experiencing the raw physical reality of construction meant he understood how his designs would actually translate into bolted steel and crafted interiors.
It's the total opposite of an inherited title. He was earning his expertise piece by piece. He had to understand the weight, the fit, the strain of every single piece of material before he was ever allowed to design the whole.
Precisely. It was only after that 18 months of intense, physical, hands-on experience, often involving long hours, physically demanding tasks, that he was then allowed to move into the drawing office for the final phase.
And how long was he there for?
He spent the last 18 months of that 5-year training period focusing on the technical drafting and the detailed mathematical calculations that would, become the core of his professional genius.
And the dedication was just exceptional. The accounts of his time as a young apprentice, they all emphasized this tireless work ethic.
He didn't just put in the hours.
No, he worked long days at the yard, and then rather than socializing or resting, he continued his studies well into the evening.
His commitment was legendary, almost from the very start. People who worked alongside him spoke of his sharp wit and his relentless penchant for hard work, which made him stand out even in a high-performing firm like Harland and Wolff.
So is that combination of intellect, practical knowledge, and sheer endurance that really brought him prominence?
It was. He was marked very early on as someone destined for the top, not just because of his family name, but because he earned the respect of the men who actually worked the tools.
That rigorous foundation set the stage for what was a truly dizzying professional ascent. By 1901, the momentum was just unstoppable. After rotating through the company, Andrews had climbed to the position of assistant shipyard manager.
And then quickly moved up to manager of the construction works.
Right. And that same year, 1901, his status as a technical leader was formally recognized. He became a member of the Institution of Naval Architects.
Which is not just a club. It's a professional body that certifies and validates the absolute highest level of engineering competence in naval design. This membership confirmed his standing as a world-class designer, someone who could be trusted with the largest, most ambitious projects you could imagine.
And by 1907, his upward trajectory hits its peak. He's appointed managing director, which puts him in a central leadership position right as Harland and Wolff was gearing up for one of the most ambitious shipbuilding projects in history.
This is it. This is when he oversees the plans for the 3 new White Star liners that would define the era: the RMS Olympic, the RMS Titanic, and the RMS Britannic.
The scale of this assignment is just hard to overstate. The design goal, which was spearheaded by Andrews, along with William Peary and Alexander Carlisle, was revolutionary.
They weren't just building bigger ships.
Not at all. They were building ships designed to completely redefine safety, luxury, and size. The explicit intention was to create the largest, safest, and most opulent vessels sailing the seas, floating palaces that dwarfed anything that had come before. And Andrews, based on the sources, was intricately and intimately connected with every single technical detail of both the Olympic and the Titanic.
He was.
Yet, despite the fact that he was the principal designer, the genius behind the blueprints for the largest moving objects on the planet at that time, we keep circling back to this remarkable detail about his humility. He clearly earned the title of naval architect. He had the formal certification and the revolutionary designs to prove it.
But he consistently avoided using it. The sources confirm he usually referred to himself simply as a shipbuilder or a director of the firm.
It's not just modesty, is it? It's a reflection of his core philosophy, which seems to stem right from his apprenticeship.
It is. By calling himself a shipbuilder, he was connecting himself directly to the men on the floor, the ones who drove the rivets and crafted the joinery. He prioritized the earned respect of the yard over the academic title.
That connection to the workers seems to be a huge part of his legacy within the yard, maybe even more so than his designs. He was, fundamentally, the people's man.
He really was, and the accounts of him are just glowing. He was universally admired and well-loved among the shipyard employees. People describe him using words like cheery, optimistic, and profoundly generous.
Not the usual descriptors for the managing director of a massive industrial firm.
No. And the anecdotes really bring this to life, showing his relentless dedication wasn't just professional, it was personal. He was known for being a tireless worker who frequently showed up at any hour, day or night, to check on progress.
And more surprisingly, he was always willing to literally lend a hand. If a gang of workers was struggling with a physically demanding task, Andrews would roll up his sleeves and help them lift or haul the necessary materials.
And he didn't distance himself. There are accounts of him sharing his lunch with fellow workers, particularly if someone was having a rough day or just, needed it. This suggests a true camaraderie and a blurring of the rigid class lines that usually defined industrial life at the turn of the century.
His leadership style reflects this balance. It wasn't purely democratic, but it wasn't autocratic either.
No, he encouraged workers to use their minds, inviting input and feedback from the ground level. He believed the best ideas could come from anyone who had that intimate practical knowledge of the construction.
But he was not a pushover.
Oh, not at all. If a worker made a mistake, particularly one that involved safety or gross negligence, he certainly intervened. But instead of just firing the person, which was often the industrial standard, Andrews would typically give the worker the rough side of his tongue and a friendly caution.
The emphasis was on correction, on mentorship and retaining that knowledge, not just instant dismissal.
Exactly. And this approach cultivated immense loyalty because the workers knew he believed in their potential and valued their expertise.
So we have this portrait of a man who bridged two worlds, the rarefied air of Belfast society and the intensely physical world of the shipyard floor. earning trust in both, which is just a rare feat for a leader of his stature.
The source material gives us these glimpses into how he balanced this demanding professional life with his family. In 1908, Thomas Andrews married Helen Riley Barber, and they set up their home in Belfast.
And they had one child, a daughter, Elizabeth Law Barber Andrews, born in November 1910.
Known affectionately by her initials, ELBA.
That profound modesty we've been talking about, the avoidance of the title naval architect, it extended right into his home life. His wife, Helen, gave a very telling quote in later years, reflecting on his character. She said he had the humblest opinion of anyone I ever knew.
It just underscores that he truly did not see himself as the titan of industry and design that the rest of the world perceived him to be.
There's another small, incredibly humanizing detail we find in the sources that connects his personal health to his relationship with the crew.
The varicose veins.
Yes, Andrews suffered from varicose veins in his legs, which caused him pain, particularly during those long hours spent inspecting these vast ships.
And this leads us back to the crew of the Olympic. Because he had been so diligent about improving their living quarters, checking dimensions, ensuring ventilation, making sure the crew spaces were as comfortable as possible, they were so grateful that they actually took up a collection.
They did. They gifted him a handsome, engraved walking stick out of pure gratitude. This is such a powerful testament. The gift wasn't for designing the ship. It was for caring about the people who operated it.
And this attention to detail and care for the crew is directly relevant to why he was on the Titanic's maiden voyage in April 1912. He was leading what was known as the Guarantee Group.
Right, which was essentially the quality control and post-launch maintenance team from Harland and Wolff.
We need to be clear about their purpose. The Guarantee Group comprised a handful of expert workers, including Edward Wilding, who worked on hull design, and others who were there to observe every aspect of the ship's operation.
From the noise levels in the dining saloon to the efficiency of the engines, they were there to compile a comprehensive list of snags and necessary improvements.
And Andrews was there as the lead architect, responsible for signing off on the vessel's final perfection. He was booked into first class, cabin A36.
The sources detail his commitment right up to the minute of sailing in Southampton. His schedule in the days leading up to departure was described as manic, focused on last-minute tweaks and fixes.
His secretary, Thompson Hamilton, described him as being never for a moment idle, constantly taking notes, managing correspondence, handling urgent papers.
And he wasn't just giving orders from the bridge either. The accounts emphasize his almost obsessive physical involvement in the final touches. Hamilton detailed how Andrews was physically placing items himself.
Things like making sure racks were installed correctly, positioning tables, checking berth ladders, and even confirming the placement of electric fans.
That level of perfectionism speaks volumes. He reportedly told Hamilton that unless he personally saw everything right, he could not be satisfied. Think about the scope of that task, a ship spanning several city blocks with thousands of details, and he felt compelled to micromanage the placement of a single fan.
He felt an intense personal responsibility for the perfection of his creation.
And it's here, amidst this flurry of final, meticulous preparations, that we find his last known words to his wife before the departure. It's deeply poignant.
It is. He was already carrying the burden of leaving home. His father was ill, and Helen herself was unwell.
Yet in his correspondence, he focused on his professional pride and certainty. The Titanic is now about complete and will, I think, do the old firm credit tomorrow when we sail.
It's a moment of immense professional satisfaction, but it's tinged with this personal difficulty. He was certain he was sailing on a triumphant vessel, a true credit to the firm he had dedicated his life to, even as he was leaving behind people he cared for deeply who were not in good health.
It was a commitment to duty above all else.
When Andrews boarded the Titanic in Southampton on April 10th, the sources agree he was initially high-spirited, thrilled with the vessel's initial appearance and his own thorough inspection. He took time to say goodbye to Thompson Hamilton and others, reminding them to keep Helen informed of the ship's news as it progressed across the Atlantic.
But almost immediately, there was a jarring note of discord. As the Titanic pulled away from the dock, the powerful wash generated by the ship caused the secured mooring lines of the nearby liner SS City of New York to snap.
And the two ships drifted terrifyingly close to a collision. Andrews was an eyewitness to this near disaster, and he reportedly found the situation decidedly unpleasant.
That must have been a deeply unsettling way to begin a maiden voyage. A reminder that despite the scale and power of the new ship, Outside forces and human error could still cause massive problems.
And this sense of subtle tension continued. Later, after they had successfully completed the stop in Queenstown, Andrews made a revealing comment at a dining table.
What was that?
He hinted that while he and his team were focused on perfection, the White Star Line's schedule was paramount. He mentioned that in certain ways, the Titanic was perhaps not entirely ready to sail. A few more days of final checks might have been beneficial.
But they had to proceed because the pre-scheduled departure date of April 10th had arrived, and the ship simply had to sail on time.
Exactly. It confirms a subtle but crucial tension between the designer's desire for flawless readiness and the commercial pressure to meet deadlines.
And throughout the journey, he remained the dedicated professional. Bedroom steward Henry Etches provided testimony that Andrews was working all the time,
Constantly moving about the ship, taking detailed notes. Though Etches observed that most of these notes were focused on what we would call aesthetic or cosmetic improvements, perhaps moving a light fitting or suggesting better placement for a chair. He was still in the mode of perfecting his masterpiece.
Yet, if you look closely at the emotional accounts, you can see that the physical distance from home and perhaps the underlying pressure began to weigh on him.
Definitely. On the night of April 12th, the second day at sea, stewardess Mary Sloan encountered Andrews in the grand staircase. She noted that he seemed to be in a very different emotional state.
Sloane said she found him looking very sad and loath to go.
That phrase, loath to go, meaning reluctant or unwilling to proceed, is so striking. He specifically expressed regret that the ship was taking them further away from home and shared his concern over his ill father and his wife's current health.
Sloane recalled that he had a very sad expression on his face. This gives us crucial insight. The public face was one of professional accomplishment, but the private man was battling profound homesickness and concern.
Perhaps already sensing the immense responsibility he carried.
It's a striking contrast when we move forward 2 days to the night of April 14th, the final night. Sloane's impression was that Andrews was back in good spirits. He was enjoying the social aspect of the first-class dining experience.
He was visibly relaxing. There's that wonderful anecdote, often recounted by survivors, involving Eleanor Caspier. When she arrived at dinner in a stunning, attention-grabbing gown, Andrews was described as chipper and animated.
Right. He let out a cheerful noise for her choice, leaning over to say, "Now that's the way a lady should look." He was appreciative of the luxury and style he'd helped create.
He was also talking openly about his private life, which suggests a certain comfort and trust with his fellow passengers. Albert and Vera Dick, a couple who had grown fond of him, noted that specifically at dinner on that Sunday evening, he talked almost constantly about his wife, his little girl, his mother, his family. He was a man anticipating a happy reunion.
After dinner, he was seen making his final rounds, even stopping to thank the baker for a special type of bread he had enjoyed.
That courtesy extended even in his final hours.
He then returned to his stateroom, A36, where he began making calculations and drawings for future use, likely working on the improvements he'd noted during the voyage.
His last reported confidence before the collision shows just how utterly certain he was in his life's work. He reportedly remarked to a friend that the Titanic was as nearly perfect as human brains can make her.
He was in his room, focusing on perfection, when, at 11:40 p.m., the ship struck the iceberg.
The impact, a glancing blow along the starboard side caused by scraping the submerged ice shelf, was the defining moment that shifted Thomas Andrews' role from designer and quality controller to crisis manager and ultimate authority on the ship's fate.
The initial reaction on board was confusion, not panic. Eleanor Caspier may have been the first witness to see him after the impact.
Right. She recalled that Andrews may have initially gone out to investigate, even reassuring some nearby passengers, perhaps before he understood the scope, that the ship was absolutely unsinkable. The legend was that the ship could stay afloat even if it broke into 3 parts.
That legend was rooted in a partial truth of the design, wasn't it?
It was. The Titanic had 16 transverse bulkheads, creating 17 watertight compartments. The design incorporated a safety margin that allowed the ship to remain afloat, even if any 4 of those compartments were completely breached and flooded. This was revolutionary engineering for the time, and it's why the ship was considered effectively unsinkable in almost any foreseeable accident.
But the reality was rapidly proving otherwise. Andrews, knowing his creation better than anyone, immediately went below deck to investigate the extent of the damage himself.
We have several accounts confirming this urgency. Saloon steward James Johnstone saw Andrews racing down toward E-deck, heading into the lower areas of the ship, likely toward the engine room, to confer with Chief Engineer Joseph Bell.
He was later seen leading a small inspection team, including Captain Smith, Chief Purser Hugh McElroy, and a mail clerk, inspecting the damage firsthand in the mailroom area where the water was already rising rapidly.
This descent into the flooded decks was the ultimate moment of professional reckoning. He wasn't just observing damage, he was confronting the failure of his own mathematical certainty.
The crushing reality was delivered when he returned to the bridge to report to Captain Smith. Stewardess Annie Robinson was present and overheard the devastating summary.
Andrews was heard saying to the captain, "Well, 3 have gone already, Captain."
That seemingly simple line is the core of the tragedy.
Yeah.
It means he had identified 3 flooded compartments already, but the truth was far worse.
Subsequent analysis confirms Andrews quickly determined that the first 5 of the ship's 16 watertight compartments were rapidly flooding, or compromised beyond recovery.
And this is the critical technical detail. 5 flooded compartments meant the ship's carefully calculated safety margin was exceeded by 1.
Exactly. The water would spill progressively over the top of the compromised bulkheads, a process called topping from one compartment to the next, like water progressively filling an ice cube tray. It meant the sinking was definitive and irreversible. There was no way to save the ship.
The psychological weight of this realization must have been just overwhelming. He was the one person who could truly calculate the ship's life expectancy with chilling precision.
And he relayed that terrible implication to Captain Smith immediately. Based on the rate of flooding, he estimated the vessel had only about an hour and a half before foundering.
A race against a clock he himself had designed, a clock that had just run out of time.
And the immediate, terrifying consequence of this calculation was that he and Smith instantly grasped the severe, fatal shortage of lifeboats. They had enough capacity for barely half the people on board.
The physical manifestation of this realization on Andrews himself is noted by witnesses. Passenger Anna Warren saw him rushing up the grand staircase on D deck, taking the steps 3 at a time, and noted what she described as a look of terror on his face.
But you have to believe this isn't the terror of a man scared for his own life. It's the terror of knowing with certainty the impending doom of 2,000 people.
He was burdened with the truth. Passenger William Sloper saw him hurrying towards the bridge, looking worried. But even in sharing the truth, he tried to mitigate panic.
We have the account of him speaking to Albert and Vera Dick, telling them, "There's no cause for any excitement. All of you get what you can in the way of clothes and come on deck as soon as you can. She is torn to bits below, but she will not sink if her after bulkheads hold."
So he was still holding out a sliver of hope, or at least presenting a facade of it, but simultaneously giving them the urgent instruction to get to the lifeboats. This contrast, the professional certainty of destruction combined with the urgent human duty to mitigate the loss, drove his actions from that moment forward.
Once Thomas Andrews made that crucial, devastating calculation, his professional life ended, and his moral character took over completely. Knowing the limited time available, the sources are unanimous. He dedicated every single remaining minute of his life to the evacuation process.
He became a singular force of calm and direction.
He did. He went back below deck, into the maze of cabins to help passengers prepare.
His methods were practical and highly effective, focusing on specific instructions rather than, abstract advice. He encountered stewardess Annie Robinson again, and when she tried to protest about the appearance of putting on a life belt, he was firm.
He understood the psychology of panic. He firmly told her, "Put on your life belt and walk about and let the passengers see you." He needed the crew to model urgency and preparedness. When she still hesitated, expressing concern that it looked rather mean to be ready, he replied with a powerful mandate. "No, put it on."
And then, well, if you value your life, put your belt on.
He had no time for misplaced social concerns. Survival was the only goal.
His attention to detail, which defined his work, now defined his rescue efforts. He instructed steward Etches to check every cabin and ensure that every passenger had been awakened. More importantly, he stressed the need to check for life belts that might have been overlooked.
He gave detailed instructions, pointing out that life belts were often stored in difficult-to-see places on top of wardrobes and on high racks. He understood that in the chaos, people wouldn't know where to look, and the crew needed to physically assist them.
He was transforming from an architect worried about fan placement to an emergency manager concerned with the placement of every single piece of safety equipment.
And this relentless effort to save others, putting the design failure out of his mind and focusing entirely on human lives, became the overwhelming testimony of the survivors.
Mary Sloane's description of him is perhaps the most enduring. She described him as a blur of activity.
Here, there, and everywhere, looking after everybody, telling the women to put on life belts, telling the stewardesses to hurry the women up to the boats, all about everywhere, thinking of everyone but himself.
It speaks to an almost impossible level of selflessness and sustained energy in the face of inevitable death.
Andrews was consistently present at the launch sites, trying to maximize the capacity of the scarce lifeboats. He was observed at the launch of lifeboat number 7 and then later assisting at lifeboat number 5, standing alongside J. Bruce Ismay.
With the time running out and the realization that there wasn't enough room, he became a shepherd, urging people into the boats, trying to overcome their initial reluctance to leave the perceived safety of the large ship.
He motioned Eleanor Caspier into a boat, the same woman whose gown he had complimented just hours earlier. And when she asked why he was not joining her, he replied with the simple, unwavering principle of the sea, one that superseded any professional title or social status. No, women and children first.
What's truly heartbreaking is the psychological burden he carried. He was the one person who knew, with absolute scientific certainty, the ship's remaining lifespan.
We hear of this burden in his encounter with the passengers John Jack, Borland Thayer III, and his father. Thayer Sr., seeking the truth, asked Andrews the grim question.
And Andrews responded quietly, without hysterics but with total honesty, that he did not give the ship much over an hour to live. Imagine being the man to deliver that verdict, the man whose genius created the marvel, now forced to admit its fatal flaw and estimate the exact minute of its destruction.
That immense weight of knowledge did not cause him to retreat or despair, it galvanized his service. The Titanic ultimately sank at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th. Thomas Andrews perished with the ship, and his body was never recovered.
The chaos of the final moments means that the exact details of Thomas Andrews' death, like so many others, are contested. However, one specific, potent image has dominated the narrative for over a century.
This is the widely known account, cemented in popular culture, often depicted in films and books, particularly popularized by Walter Lord's research, which places Andrews in the first-class smoking room.
The scene reportedly occurred around 2:05 a.m., just moments before the final plunge.
In this powerful version, Andrews is standing alone, his arms folded, staring blankly at the dark wood paneling and the Norman Wilkinson painting Plymouth Harbor, which hung over the fireplace. Crucially, his lifebelt is lying unused on a nearby table.
And an assistant steward, identified by some sources as John Stewart, allegedly approached him and asked if he would try to escape.
But Andrews reportedly did not move or speak. He just stood like one stunned, accepting his fate passively. This image, the creator awaiting doom in the room dedicated to quiet leisure and reflection, is highly symbolic. It was a narrative of resigned responsibility that was rapidly codified in the public imagination, reinforced by Shan Bullock's 1912 biography.
But historians and analysts, using the full range of witness testimony, have found significant conflicts with this narrative of passive resignation. And this conflict forms one of a really compelling aspect of his final moments.
Indeed. The circumstantial evidence concerning the steward who supposedly witnessed this scene is problematic. Accounts suggest that Assistant Steward John Stewart may have actually left the ship much earlier, around 1:40 a.m. in lifeboat number 15.
So if Stewart was off the ship before 2 a.m., he couldn't have witnessed Andrews' passive vigil at 2:05 a.m.
It casts serious doubt on the precise details and the timing of that famous moment.
And crucially, Bullock's biography, while it helps cement the image, did conclude that Andrews spent the entire crisis working to the bitter end to assist passengers and crew.
And we have compelling evidence that suggests he left that smoking room to continue his duties. Mary Sloane's testimony is a key piece of counter-evidence.
What did she say?
She recalled him persuading her to enter a lifeboat, using strong, commanding language. "Ladies, you must get in at once. There's not a moment to lose. You cannot pick and choose your boat. Don't hesitate. Get in."
And this active, life-saving intervention occurred around 2:05 a.m., the exact same time the passive smoking room scene supposedly took place.
If Sloane's timeline is correct, Andrews was still actively guiding people to safety, not waiting for death.
Furthermore, we have later reported sightings that suggest continued proactive rescue efforts. A private letter written by his friend David Galloway to Lord Peary, based on interviews with surviving crew members, cited an unnamed officer who saw Andrews performing a final, desperate act of immediate rescue.
That officer claimed to see Andrews throwing deck chairs overboard to the unfortunate struggling in the water below for flotation. This is a man who, in the last 5 or 10 minutes of the sinking, recognized that his job was no longer putting people in boats, but providing any means of survival to those already in the frigid water.
It's a critical piece of testimony showcasing his enduring commitment to others.
Other accounts place him heading toward the bridge, carrying a lifebelt, perhaps the one from the smoking room table, possibly looking to confer with Captain Smith for the final time. It suggests he was active, seeking final instructions or coordination.
And this brings us to what may be the very last reported witness, Mess Steward Cecil Fitzpatrick.
Fitzpatrick claimed to have seen Andrews and Captain Smith together on the bridge, just moments before the ship began its final, terrifying plunge into the Atlantic. According to Fitzpatrick, both men were present and both finally secured lifebelts. Smith reportedly spoke to Andrews one last time, saying, "We cannot stay any longer. She's going."
And Fitzpatrick then stated he saw both Andrews and Smith jump overboard just as the water reached the bridge.
While we may never know the precise final action of Thomas Andrews, the overwhelming consensus of the accounts, especially those from people he personally ordered into lifeboats, is that he remained dedicated to the survival of others until the very end, whether actively throwing chairs or standing by the captain for the final moment of duty.
The immediate reaction to the disaster confirmed the nature of his sacrifice, ensuring his legacy was sealed within days of the sinking. Just 4 days after the Titanic went down, on April 19, 1912, his father received a telegram from a cousin in New York.
And this telegram summarized the consensus of the survivors who had been rescued.
The message was clear and definitive. All unanimous that Andrews died a heroic death, thinking only of others' safety, extend heartfelt sympathy to all.
That immediate, unanimous confirmation established the narrative of self-sacrifice that endures today.
Newspaper accounts immediately labeled him a hero, focusing on the terrible irony of the architect perishing with his design.
And Mary Sloane's personal letter, written shortly after her rescue, further cemented this, stating that Mr. Andrews met his fate like a true hero, realizing the great danger, and gave up his life to save the women and children of the Titanic. They will find it hard to replace him. The loss was felt deeply, both personally and professionally.
The public response in his native Ireland was swift and substantial. His hometown of Comer established one of the earliest and most significant memorials for a single victim of the disaster.
The Thomas Andrews Jr. Memorial Hall was opened in January 1914, designed by local architects Young and Mackenzie. Today it remains a tangible tribute, used by the Andrews Memorial Primary School, ensuring his memory is connected to education and community.
We can also note the enduring professional connection. Of all the ships designed by Thomas Andrews and the Harland and Wolff team in that era,
the tender SS Nomadic, which carried passengers from Cherbourg to the Titanic, remains the sole surviving vessel of the White Star Line designed by Andrews. It's a small, tangible link back to his drawing board.
And on a more cosmic level, the memory of the genius shipbuilder endures. In 2004, the minor planet 245158 Thomas Andrews was named in his honor,
confirming his place not only in history but in the celestial records.
Finally, we have to acknowledge his enduring presence in popular culture. He remains a powerful, necessary figure in the narrative of the Titanic, appearing in countless adaptations across film and television.
Portrayals by actors like Michael Goodliffe and Victor Garber have ensured that the image of the dedicated, quietly courageous architect who stays behind remains a central, morally anchoring point of the tragedy.
Thomas Andrews' story is a complex portrait of a genius shipbuilder whose professional pride in creating what he believed to be nearly perfect was ultimately overshadowed by his profound personal moral character.
When that creation failed spectacularly, he chose duty and sacrifice over survival, embodying the very best of leadership under the worst possible circumstances.
When you reflect on the detailed accounts of his final hours, consider the immense psychological load Andrews carried. He was the one person on board who knew definitively in that critical moment that the very safeguards he had designed were insufficient and that the design failure was fatal and irreversible.
The truth of the 5 flooded compartments rested solely on his shoulders. He knew his life's work was sinking and that the ship had only 90 minutes left. The only remaining action for him was to ensure that his passengers and crew, the people who helped build or sailed on his ship, had a chance to live.
What does it mean to witness the failure of one's life's purpose and respond not with despair but with perfect clarity of service?
Thanks for listening.